Good afternoon, viewers. Welcome to another episode of Sheriff's Podcast with yours truly, Joel Bagmudin, where I'll be spending the next half an hour or so discussing, sharing my insights and discussing some of my analysis on critical public policy matters and economic issues. I want to deal with primarily two topics today that have that have been occupying public space, public commentary within certain spheres in the public domain, social media, etc. And this is one, cost of living. Every day, one particular mainstream media house carries a series of articles on cost of living. Every day, other political commentators on the opposite side, on the other spectrum of the political aisle, argues about cost of living and that contending whether the government, or basically arguing that the government could do more in terms of wages and so on. So I want to deal with that today in a very succinct manner to examine the fiscal measures that the government would have implemented and the manner in which they would have confronted cost of living, and how those measures would have impacted and the results derived therefrom from the fiscal policy measures aimed directly towards targeting cost of living, easing the tax burden, increasing disposable income, and targeting vulnerable groups. the Before we get into that, and that is my substantive topic today that I want to discuss, my attention was drawn earlier today, to a post made, since we're talking about fiscal measures, my attention was drawn to a social media post made by a, a member of the controversial sanctioned political party, sanctioned an agent of a relative and slash an agent of the United States OFAC sanctioned controversial embattled presidential hopeful, about a statement the General Secretary of the People's Progressive Party, Civic, made yesterday at his press conference. The statement he made yesterday, that this agent of this embattled presidential hopeful highlighted, was, he said in his press conference, that in the last 5 years, and he said it in the context of going through the government's policy measures on the very topic that I want to discuss, focus on substantively today, cost of living. And he said that in the last 5 years that the PPPC government did not introduce a single new tax, did not introduce a single new taxation, and they would have honored their commitment in the very first budget, the 2020 budget, when they would have contended, which is a matter of fact as well, that under the APNU AFC tenure during 2015 and 2020, they would have significantly increased the tax burden on each taxpayer by adding nearly 300 new tax measures and fees that affected even the snow cone man and the guy working with his horse cart and so on, motorcycle license, the fees for those type of stuff, permits and licenses, and hundreds of other items that were never attracting VAT, that were zero rated from VAT, hundreds of items that were zero rated. The APNU FC government added 14% VAT for the first time. For example, electricity, they added VAT on electricity. Imagine what that would have done to electricity bills for the average consumer. Well, not just the average consumer, for all consumers, house, residential, low-income families, middle-income families, high-income families, commercial and industrial users. VAT on water. These are essential commodity, essential cost of living that has direct relationship with cost of living, direct impact on cost of living. Adding VAT for the first time on private education and so on. A long list of nearly 300 items. So he was talking about the fact that in the very first budget, they reversed those measures, reverted to the pre-2015 where those fees were. In some cases, fees were increased by over 200 and 300%. The VAT measures were reversed. And in the 5 years, not a single new tax was implemented. And in fact, over the last 5 years, the government would have removed taxes in certain areas, reduced income taxes and so on, and incentivized some other sectors, productive sectors. Now, the agent that I'm referring to extracted that statement that the General Secretary of the People's Progressive Party Civic made yesterday and post a caption to say that the General Secretary was basically dishonest. And they pointed out, they pull up screenshots, the agent screen captured news articles of a specific matter. And the specific matter that they used to contend that the Vice President was dishonest about not introducing any new taxes was that there was a court case in 2023 whereby, by way of regulation, the Guyana Revenue Authority was charging an excise tax of 30% to remigrants' vehicle. Remigrants coming to Guyana, remigrants moving back to Guyana, and if they want to bring their vehicle, a 30% excise tax was applied, which was increased from 10% on vehicles with an engine size of 3,000 cc and upwards. 3,000 cc and upwards attracted, by way of regulation in 2023, an increased excise tax of 10% to 30% by remigrants, or applied to remigrants. So the agent of this controversial US-sanctioned political party and presidential hopeful highlighted this single matter, not understanding the context, to say that the Vice President was being dishonest. Now, isn't this interesting and ironic? And I don't want to be too political, but it is hard-pressed for me not to examine the pattern of event here, or what is implied. This is an individual, and this is an individual or a group who has now formed himself into a group comprising mainly his family members. So some of his family members, as it would appear, not all of his family members, forming themselves into this political entity to contest the elections, the national elections for the highest office in this dear land of ours. An individual who is the subject of OFAC sanctions for the very adverse events, allegations such as gold smuggling, tax evasion, And specifically in relation to tax evasion, in respect to a luxury vehicle, the importation of a luxury vehicle, two luxury vehicles for that matter, and one of it specifically was imported into the country by that family under the remigrant scheme, and that matter is engaging the attention of the court in Guyana for alleged tax evasion, for misusing that remigrant scheme. Isn't that ironic and isn't that telling? Because this has become a political soundbite for them now. This has become a political, they're trying to use this single thing, which they are directly a beneficiary of, who would have allegedly abused the system, pointing out that singular matter, ignoring the context, and most of all ignoring the wide range of tax measures in terms of alleviating tax burden on the citizens of this country in the last 5 years. If I'm to enumerate some of those, they've ignored the following. And you have to ask yourself, the ordinary, how many remigrants do we have in this country that come into this country and can afford a 3,000cc luxury vehicle? That policy is in no way designed to target the average Guyanese. That policy is in no way designed to target or to impose any sort of burden to the average Guyanese. What policies have the government implemented targeting the average Guyanese in terms of responding to cost of living, in terms of increasing disposable income, in terms of targeting vulnerable groups, and in terms of measures designed to improve the standard of living and the quality of life of our people? Let's look at reforms, tax reforms for vehicles. There were two broad categories of reforms for vehicles that the government implemented in the last 5 years. Electric vehicle that previously attracted high excise taxes, import duties, and VAT. The government removed those taxes from electric vehicle. The second category, vehicles with 1500cc and less, or up to 1500cc. That category of vehicles, taxes were revised downwards. From 45 excise taxes went from 45% down to 30%. And VAT in some categories that was previously applicable to some categories of vehicle, VAT was also removed. What has that resulted in the last 5 years? In the last 5 years, as a result of those measures, in terms of policy, tax measures to allow for greater affordability of vehicle ownership. The result derived from that was importation of vehicle, or I should say registration, not importation, the annual registration of vehicles, in other words, the annual purchases of vehicle, in the period before this 5-year period, in the pre-2020 period, was around 4,200 to 5,000 vehicles annually. Now we're doing 4 times that in a single year. In other words, in the pre-2020 period, before these reforms to the duties applied to vehicles, the annual, the quantum of vehicles that were registered or that were purchased by Guyanese in a 4-year period, we are now doing a 4-year period in a single year. We're now doing a 4-year period in a single year. Let me interpret that using another metric. Let me now look at that in terms of a ratio of new vehicles to the ratio of vehicles to new roads being built. In the pre-2020 period, for every kilometer of new road constructed, built in this country, we have added 7 vehicles on the road in the pre-2020 period. As a result of those tax reforms, not the 3,000 cc for immigrants, and then and the reason why, I'll elaborate more on the reason why, but on that, the ratio of new vehicles added to the road now, today, in the last 5 years, to every new kilometer of road built is now 12 vehicles per kilometer. From 7 to 12. Having said that, let's come back to this 3,000 cc. Now the 3,000 cc 30% for remigrants through a remigrant scheme. There are 2 reasons as a matter of national policy. The first is the GRA. There was a court case to this effect. Therefore, which means there are court documents to this effect. The Guyana Revenue Authority has reported or has filed in the court that they have countless number of cases in which the remigrant scheme is abused. So that's reason number 1. In the very instance of this individual I'm referring to, the subject of what I'm talking about, they are in court for the very thing, abusing the remigrant scheme. They are the subject of a court matter. Hence, I shall not say further. The second reason, and here now, this will now reveal the intellectual deficit of this group of people that is vying for office, that they have no clue about policy and running a country. They have absolutely no clue. Absolutely no clue what they're talking about. They only want, this is a classic case to prove and demonstrate that they are only concerned about themselves and benefits for themselves at whatever cost, at any cost, whether that means engaging in illegal activities, whether that means tax evasion, whether that means understating your invoices, defrauding the state of taxes. This is the normal modus operandi of these people. And this is all, this very post is evidence of that fact. It's a revelation of that fact. Indisputably. There's no argument there. I've given you, I said there are two reasons. The first I spoke of relates to the system being abused. Abused to the extent where the state is often on the losing end, to the extent where the state is defrauded or shortchanged of taxes. Remember, this is not for all vehicles, you know. You can bring in a 1500 cc and you don't got to pay so much tax. This is 3000 cc upwards. The second and the most important reason for this policy, targeting 3000 upwards, 3000 cc upwards, is because it is consistent with, it is in alignment with the low carbon development strategy of the country. Guyana is a signatory to global treaties in which, such as the United Nations treaties, such as the Paris Accord, whereby we are a signatory together with the rest of the world towards transitioning, where the global economy is transitioning towards a cleaner, climate-friendly environment and a cleaner, climate-friendly way in which we operate and conduct our daily activities. Climate change targets. And where the world wants to get the target that the rest of the world, I should say, their target in that regard is to achieve net zero by 2050. The rest of the world is far away from achieving that target. Very far away from achieving that target. And guess what? Guyana is already where the world wants to be in 2050, insofar as climate change and net zero is concerned. Insofar as climate change policies and us being a net zero country, a net zero jurisdiction, largely attributed to about 80% or so, or more than 80% of our landmass, of our standing forest, our original forest. we are a net zero country, if not net negative by now. So we're already net zero. We have a low carbon development strategy to now our goal now, since we're already where the world wants to be by 2050, net zero, we are now moving towards net negative. And the policies towards that is moving from the transitioning to our energy sector, transitioning our energy sector from traditional source of energy, the traditional source which is fuel, which is crude oil sources, to natural gas, and we still have as part of our energy mix hydropower and all of that to reduce our carbon emission. But that is only one sector. So this policy of the 30% excise tax applied to migrants for vehicles 3000 cc and upwards is to really discourage that, because that a bigger engine, any vehicle with a larger engine will have a higher carbon emission, which goes counter to our objective as a policy level. So how do you discourage that? You raise the taxes on that. That tax does not affect the ordinary man or the average Guyanese. That tax policy is not a bread and butter matter. That tax policy does not impact disposable income of a low income family or a middle income family. You have choices. The policy is really saying we don't want these types of vehicles, we don't want too many of it, we want to discourage it because they're not environmentally friendly. That's it. If the average carbon emission of a vehicle that runs on petrol or gasoline is about 0.4 tons, the average. Let's say you drive 7,000 kilometers a year, multiply 7,000 kilometers by 0.4, that's how much carbon emission in a year from a single vehicle. So that policy is aimed towards discouraging that, which is in alignment with a low carbon development. And that is why electric vehicles taxes were removed, and other categories of vehicles as well taxes were reduced, and the government has committed to further reforming the vehicle taxation regime in the next term. And you would appreciate we can't do it radically, because as I've shown you, we're now doing 12 vehicles for every kilometer of road, up from 7 vehicles for every new kilometer of road built. So that means we're not building the roads fast enough. People are purchasing more vehicles. The rate of vehicle ownership is greater than the rate at which we're building new roads. So we have to balance that, or else if we don't do that, if we don't balance it and do it in an incremental way, then we'll end up right back at square one, where you'd have mass confusion and chaos on the road and heavy congestion. So it has to be timed, it has to be incremental. The pace at which we build new roads, we have to maintain that pace. We don't want the rate of vehicle ownership to move up higher than where it already is, to lead to that kind of congestion on the roadways. Now, I see I'm already 30 minutes into my time. Let me briefly now walk you through the cost of living measures. I've mentioned already the reversal of the tax measures in the pre-2020 period, the 2015-2020 period by the AFC government. In the last 5 years, the government increased the income tax threshold. The last budget, a number of innovative fiscal tools were implemented. For example, in addition to increasing the income tax threshold, the deduction per child was introduced, the overtime of up to $50,000 if you're working another job, tax-free, and a series of other measures like those, all aimed towards increasing disposable income. The income tax rate was reduced. The income tax rate was reduced from 45% on the upper bracket down to 35%, and from 28% on the lower bracket to 25%, giving rise to an effective tax rate of 17%, down from an effective tax rate of 25%. The importation of fuel, when you go to the gas station to fuel your vehicle, to fill up your gas tank, and fuel drives everything else, energy and everything else that we do as an input commodity, which means it's an input cost on almost everything: transportation, production, the food we consume, the production of the food we consume. The government removed the 50% excise tax. Fuel importation previously attracted a 50% excise tax as a mechanism to confront cost of living, to ease the burden of cost of living. 50% of that tax have been removed completely, down to zero. So that is why transportation costs remain constant, electricity costs remain constant, your water rates remain constant. Those have not increased. Only food prices fluctuating, and food prices fluctuating because of demand and supply and other factors. Now, I don't want to go too much beyond my 30 minutes. I don't want to lose your attention. So Monday or Tuesday, I think Monday is a holiday, the next episode I will pick up from where I left off. But before I end, I will quantify altogether the cost of living measures, those that I've enumerated and many others that I have not mentioned. If we're to quantify them in terms of direct and indirect benefits, indirect subsidies, and I'll explain this in greater detail next week on the next episode, have altogether amount to annually over $330 billion. Over $330 billion in direct and indirect benefits and subsidies at a household level. Divide $330 billion by 250,000 households. That is your indirect subsidy per household that the government would have afforded you through these tax, through these breaking down of the tax burden, through these policy measures, fiscal policy measures, aimed towards responding to confronting cost of living and increasing disposable income. Over $330 billion. It will take me maybe another hour and a half or 2 hours to sit and in detail enumerate each policy, each measure, and the impact that flow therefrom. It will take me another 2 hours. So I will end here for today, and in the next episode we'll pick up from here. We'll go into greater detail from this discussion. And the other thing that I thought I would have been able to touch on today, but the other matter that I began with took up more time than expected, is another political commentator that belong to a political group that recently joined the very political entity, sanctioned entity that I'm referring to, have been making this silly argument about income and making some silly suggestions about what a minimum wage should look like, and he's attached a figure to that. Now I don't want to go further than this because it will just take me into the full discussion and we'll go into another episode which I don't want to do today, which is Friday. So I'm just giving you a little bit of heads up, more or less, into what I want to deal with in the next episode in greater detail. So thank you for now. Enjoy your Friday, enjoy your weekend and the holiday weekend, and stay safe on the roadways. I'll see you next week. Thank you for watching.